In September 1939, Europe was being dragged into one of the darkest periods in history. The Second World War, which began with Germany's invasion of Poland, would not only be a war of armies and weapons, it would also become a war of invisible messages, secret orders, encrypted communications, and human intelligence. While tanks advanced across battlefields and bombers filled the skies, another battle was unfolding, one that would determine the fate of the world. This war was silent. There were no gunshots, no explosions, only the sounds of typewriters, papers, cables, mathematical formulas, and endless hours of thought. And at the center of this invisible war stood a young mathematician who would change the future of humanity. His name was Alan Turing. At the time, Nazi Germany possessed one of the most advanced military communication systems in the world. Every critical message exchanged between the German Army, Navy, and Air Force was protected by an extremely complex encryption machine called Enigma. German officers believed the system was absolutely unbreakable. With daily changing keys, millions of possible combinations, and constantly shifting settings, Enigma was considered impossible to decipher. To German commanders, it represented absolute security. They were convinced the enemy would never be able to read their messages. But history is often changed when ideas people are completely certain about turn out to be wrong. Somewhere, an ordinary-looking young man was trying to understand how machines could think. Alan Turing was not just a mathematician, he was also a genius who laid the foundations of modern computer science. Problems that others considered impossible were, to him, simply problems that had not yet been solved. Alan Matheson Turing was born in London on June 23, 1912. From childhood, he was very different from his peers. Quiet, introverted. He struggled to communicate with people, yet he seemed to have an almost supernatural connection with numbers. While some teachers complained about his lack of attention, others were astonished by the incredible speed of his mind. From a young age, he took great pleasure in solving complex problems. His exceptional talent in mathematics and logic was a sign of the world-changing work he would later accomplish. But Turing's story was not only about mathematics. It was also a story of loneliness, misunderstanding, and exclusion from society. Throughout his childhood, he struggled to build social relationships. He found it difficult to understand human emotions and often became lost in his own world of thoughts. Yet, perhaps this was exactly what freed his mind from conventional ways of thinking. It may have been the reason he could imagine things others believed impossible. In the 1920s, the world was still dominated by the mechanical age. Computers did not exist, calculations were done by hand, and complex operations could take days or even weeks. But Alan Turing had a different idea. He believed even thinking itself could become mechanical. Could a machine follow specific rules and perform human-like operations? This question would eventually form the foundation of modern computers. In 1936, Alan Turing published one of the most important academic papers in history. In it, he described a theoretical device that would later become known as the Turing machine. This concept was, in essence, the logical foundation of today's computers. Turing's theory claimed that if a problem could be expressed through clear rules, then a machine could solve it. At the time, this idea was revolutionary. People believed machines were only capable of physical labor. Turing argued that machines could also perform intellectual processes. At first, many people considered the idea too abstract. But storm clouds were gathering in Europe, and very soon, Turing's theories would stop being merely academic ideas and become weapons capable of saving millions of lives. By 1939, the British government faced a terrifying problem. Germany's communication system could not be cracked. Messages exchanged between Nazi units were intercepted regularly, but nobody could understand them. For British intelligence, this was a disastrous disadvantage. Fighting a war without knowing where the enemy would attack, which ships were moving, or what operations were being planned was nearly impossible. Britain secretly began gathering the country's brightest mathematicians, engineers, and chess champions. These individuals were sent to a hidden location about 80 kilometers from London. It was a large estate called Bletchley Park. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary countryside mansion, but inside, one of the greatest intelligence operations in history was taking place. Among the people arriving at Bletchley Park was Alan Turing. At first glance, he was not particularly remarkable. He often dressed untidily, rode his bicycle to work, and behaved awkwardly in social situations. But it didn't take long for everyone to recognize his extraordinary intelligence. While others tried to solve Enigma directly, Turing approached the problem from an entirely different perspective. From the outside, the Enigma machine resembled an ordinary typewriter, but inside were complex rotating rotors, electrical circuits, and constantly changing connections. When a key was pressed, an electrical current traveled through the rotors and transformed into another letter. For example, pressing the letter A might produce Q. But because the rotors moved with each keystroke, the same letter would transform differently each time. This made the system incredibly complex. The most terrifying aspect of Enigma was the number of possibilities. With daily settings changing constantly, the number of combinations exceeded trillions. It was impossible for a human being to test every possibility one by one. This was exactly why the Germans felt secure. But Alan Turing thought differently. To him, the challenge was not testing every possibility. The real challenge was finding human errors and repeating patterns hidden within the system. Because no matter how complex a system was, every system had a weakness, and the fate of the war depended on whether that weakness could be found. The team at Bletchley Park worked day and night without sleep. Encrypted messages constantly arrived at the center, while operators spent endless hours testing possible solutions. But progress was painfully slow. Some experts had begun to believe Enigma truly was unbreakable. The pressure was increasing every day. Europe was burning. Nazi armies were advancing rapidly, cities were falling, and thousands of people were dying. Alan Turing refused to give up. He believed that when the human brain alone was no longer enough, machines had to take over. If Enigma could generate millions of combinations, then a machine could be built to test those combinations rapidly. This idea became the first step towards changing the course of history. Turing began designing an electromechanical device. The machine would later be labeled the bomb. Its purpose was to automatically test Enigma's settings. Calculations that would take humans weeks could now be completed by a machine within hours. For that era, the concept was astonishing. Modern computers did not exist. But the project was extremely risky. The British government was already spending most of its resources on the war. Nobody knew if such a complicated machine would even work. Some officials considered Turing's ideas too theoretical. Yet, time was running out. If German messages could not be read, the war itself might be lost. And at that moment, one of the greatest battles of intellect in human history truly began. On one side stood the Enigma system, which Nazi Germany believed to be flawless. On the other side stood a young mathematician who believed machines could think. No one yet realized this was not merely the story of breaking a code. It was the beginning of the modern computer age. The nights inside the narrow corridors of Bletchley Park were growing longer. The windows were blacked out. Most of the people working there couldn't even tell their families what they were doing. The operation taking place there was one of Britain's greatest secrets. If the Nazis discovered that Enigma was being targeted, they could completely change the system. Because of this, everyone at Bletchley Park seemed bound by an oath of silence. To the outside world, they were ordinary government employees. In reality, they were soldiers fighting on the invisible front of the war. For Alan Turing, time was running out. The German army continued advancing across Europe, taking control of regions from Norway to France. Most dangerously, German submarines, the U-boats, were hunting British supply ships across the Atlantic Ocean. Every ship sunk meant hunger and collapse for Britain. If the Atlantic was lost, the war would most likely turn in Germany's favor. But the British Navy faced a massive problem. They didn't know where the German submarines were. Coordinates, attack orders, and route information were all transmitted through Enigma encrypted messages. British ships were often fighting an invisible enemy. Torpedoes would suddenly emerge from the fog, sending hundreds of people to the bottom of the sea within minutes. This was exactly why breaking Enigma was not merely an academic achievement. It was about the lives of millions of people. At first glance, the Enigma machine looked simple. It was a portable device with a keyboard. But once opened, it revealed a maze of rotors, wires, and electrical circuits inside. The basic logic of the system was incredibly clever. Every letter transformed into another letter. But the real challenge was that the transformation constantly changed. Inside the machine were rotating rotors. Every time a key was pressed, the rotors moved, changing the path of the electrical current. This meant the same letter was never encrypted the same way twice. For example, at the beginning of a message, the letter A might become X, but seconds later, the same A could become M instead. And the rotors were only part of the system. German operators also used different starting settings every single day. On top of that, plug boards further rearranged the letters. When all these elements were combined, the number of possible combinations became almost unimaginable. Today, a computer can test millions of possibilities within seconds, but in 1940, such technology did not exist. Most calculations were still performed by humans. Testing Enigma's possible settings one by one was practically impossible. Some experts at Bletchley Park were beginning to lose hope. German messages kept increasing every day. Hundreds of new encrypted communications were intercepted constantly, yet they remained unsolved. Until the code was broken, the messages were nothing more than meaningless strings of letters. But Alan Turing focused on something different. To him, no human being was truly perfect. This idea became critically important. Technically, Enigma was extremely powerful, but it was operated by humans. Humans develop habits, repeat phrases, and make mistakes. Turing noticed that German operators frequently repeated certain words while writing messages. Weather reports in particular followed recognizable patterns. Some messages began with nearly identical sentences. German officers often used phrases like "Heil Hitler." These repetitions became tiny cracks in Enigma's armor. Turing's plan was brilliant. If a likely word inside a message could be guessed, the machine could test possible settings far more quickly using that clue. This method became known as a crib, the guessed word technique. But even then, the process remained unbelievably complex. Solving it by hand still took far too long. That was where Turing's Bond machine entered the picture. The bomb was no ordinary device. For its era, it felt like technology from the future. Inside its massive cabinet-like structure were constantly spinning cylinders. When operating, the entire room echoed with metallic sounds. Rotors spun rapidly, cables vibrated, and the machine tested thousands of possibilities simultaneously. For the first time, the people at Bletchley Park witnessed a machine assisting human intelligence. Today, using computers feels completely ordinary, but back then, the idea of machines solving intellectual problems seemed almost like science fiction. That was Alan Turing's true revolution. He was not only breaking a code, he was also building the core logic of the modern computer age. The bomb machines worked day and night.
Operators continuously entered new messages into the system while possible settings were tested. Sometimes the machines produced no results for hours. But when the correct combination was finally discovered, everyone immediately sprang into action. Because time meant everything. When a message was decoded, its information was only useful for a few hours. If the analysis came too late, the intelligence could become worthless. That made Bletchley Park feel like a giant brain racing against time. Alan Turing's working style was highly unusual. He often appeared disorganized. He disliked wearing ties, sometimes rode his bicycle wearing a gas mask, and would suddenly fall silent during meetings. He struggled socially, yet his mind operated at extraordinary speed. Some employees thought he was strange, but those same people would watch in amazement as Turing solved problems that seemed impossible only minutes earlier. To Turing, Enigma was not just a technical challenge. He studied the system as if it were a living organism. He tried to understand the psychology of German operators, predict where they might make mistakes, and identify the weak points within the system. And eventually, after months of relentless effort, the first major breakthrough finally came. The bomb machines succeeded in decoding some German messages. At first, the results were limited, but every successful decryption opened another door. British intelligence could now predict certain German operations in advance. Submarine routes were identified, attacks were anticipated, and critical information reached London. The invisible balance of the war was beginning to change. But one enormous problem still remained. The Nazis were constantly improving their system. New rotors were added, settings were changed, and Enigma became more complex with every passing day. Whenever Turing and his team cracked one version, the Germans introduced another. In this war, there was no such thing as stopping, because Enigma didn't need to be broken once. It had to be broken every single day. And very soon, in the dark waters of the Atlantic Ocean, this invisible battle would become one of the most critical struggles in human history.
By 1940, most of Europe had fallen under the control of Nazi Germany. France had collapsed, and German armies had advanced rapidly across the continent. Britain was now standing almost alone. But the greatest danger was not on land, it was beneath the sea. German U-boat submarines moved silently through the Atlantic Ocean, attempting to cut Britain's lifeline. Britain was an island nation. Most of its food, fuel, weapons, and ammunition arrived by ship. If the supply convoys coming from America and Canada were stopped, Britain could face starvation. Years later, Winston Churchill would say that the thing that frightened him most during the war was the German submarine threat, because the U-boat attacks were terrifyingly effective. While a merchant ship sailed through the darkness of night, a German submarine waiting silently kilometers away would receive the order to attack. Torpedoes traveled invisibly beneath the water, and seconds later, enormous ships exploded into pieces. Sometimes, hundreds of sailors lost their lives in the freezing waters of the Atlantic. The most terrifying part was that the British often had no idea where the attacks would come from, because every movement of the German submarines was coordinated through Enigma encrypted messages. Before every attack, coded orders were transmitted, hunting zones were assigned, and groups of submarines were directed toward their targets. The Germans called this the Wolfpack tactic. Multiple submarines attacked simultaneously, surrounding convoys and leaving almost no chance of escape. The team at Bletchley Park was no longer simply solving mathematical problems. Their work directly determined whether people would live or die. Alan Turing understood this better than anyone. Every message left undecoded could mean another ship sinking. Every delay could mean hundreds of deaths. That was why Turing and his team worked at an almost superhuman pace. The lights at Bletchley Park never went out. Operators worked in shifts, while newly intercepted messages were continuously fed into the bomb machines. The rhythmic sounds of the machines had become part of the building itself. Click,
Clack, the humming of electricity, spinning rotors, vibrating metal panels, and endless hours of waiting. Sometimes an entire night passed without results, but whenever the correct combination was finally discovered, the atmosphere in the room changed instantly. People rushed to take notes, and decoded messages were immediately delivered to high-ranking commanders. One particular message drew special attention. German submarines were preparing to ambush a large convoy. The message was decrypted just in time. The British Navy changed the convoy's route, and the ships escaped the attack. It was only one incident, but throughout the war, thousands of similar moments would occur. The British government established a secret intelligence system known as Ultra. All information obtained from Enigma decryptions was hidden under this codename. Ultra was so secret that even years after the war ended, many people still had no idea such an operation had ever existed. But maintaining this secret required an extremely delicate balance. Sometimes the British could not act directly on the intelligence they had decoded. Because if the Germans realized Enigma had been broken, they would completely change the system. As a result, some attacks were knowingly allowed to happen. This created enormous psychological pressure on the people working at Bletchley Park. Imagine knowing a ship is going to be attacked, knowing people are going to die, but remaining silent in order to protect a much larger secret. That was the brutal logic of war. Alan Turing was not someone who openly expressed his emotions, but the weight of the war affected him deeply as well, because behind every decrypted message were real human lives. As the successes at Bletchley Park increased, the Germans also strengthened their security measures. The version of Enigma used by the German Navy became especially complex. At one point, the system became so difficult that the British began going blind again. And then, the Nazis added a new rotor to Enigma. The effect inside Bletchley Park was like a shock wave. The number of possible combinations increased dramatically. The existing bomb machines were no longer fast enough. Months of progress suddenly seemed frozen. Losses in the Atlantic began rising once more. Ships were sinking, supply lines were being damaged, and the pressure on Britain continued growing. Some military officials were beginning to lose hope, but Alan Turing refused to surrender. Instead, he started thinking bigger. Faster machines were needed, more advanced methods were required, and perhaps for the first time in human history, an entirely new technology was about to be born. Turing was not merely trying to solve the current problem. Without fully realizing it, he was designing the future of computers. The operations at Bletchley Park eventually grew to enormous proportions. What had started as a small group of a few dozen people transformed into a secret organization employing thousands. Mathematicians, linguists, engineers, chess masters, and even talented puzzle solvers worked there. Because breaking Enigma required more than mathematics, it required creativity, and Alan Turing stood at the center of that creativity. His mind worked differently. Where others saw chaos, he searched for order. Where others saw impossibility, he imagined new paths forward. But as the war expanded, so did the pressure, because Germany was bringing destruction not only across Europe, but also from the skies above. And very soon, Britain would face one of the greatest aerial assaults in history. To survive those attacks, the most important weapon would once again be invisible information.
By 1941, the war was no longer being won or lost only on the front lines. It was being decided within the flow of information itself. For Britain, the most critical battlefield was still the Atlantic. German U-boat attacks continued relentlessly. Supply ships were being sunk, and the pressure on London grew heavier every day. With each passing moment, breaking Enigma became even more vital. At Bletchley Park, everyone had now accepted one brutal truth: Enigma would never be solved permanently, because the Germans kept changing the system. New rotors, new settings, new procedures. This was not a single puzzle to solve once, it was a living puzzle, constantly evolving. At this point, Alan Turing realized something incredibly important. If the system kept changing, then the solution could not rely on one massive breakthrough. Instead, progress had to come in smaller pieces, not defeating the enemy in one move, but weakening them step by step. This idea led him towards a new method, Banborismus. Banborismus was a statistical technique used to analyze repeating structures within Enigma messages. The method relied entirely on mathematical intuition and probability. Its purpose was to narrow down which Enigma settings were most likely. Normally, thousands or even millions of combinations would need to be tested, but through Banborismus, that number could be reduced dramatically. The method became a bridge between human reasoning and machine calculation. Turing and his team were no longer fighting only with machines, they were fighting with probabilities. Inside Bletchley Park, there was a special workspace where teams wrote intercepted German messages onto long strips of paper. These strips were layered on top of each other, aligned carefully, and searched for patterns. Even the smallest repetition could become a major clue. For days and weeks, the same process repeated endlessly. In complete silence, people worked to solve the most complex puzzle the world had ever seen. During this period, Turing himself was beginning to wear down physically. He slept very little, often forgot to eat, and spent hours obsessing over the same problem before suddenly standing up and returning with an entirely new idea. Some employees said his mind never switched off, but that intensity had become necessary because the war in the Atlantic was being lost. As 1942 approached, German U-boat tactics became even deadlier. Wolfpack attacks were now more coordinated, faster, and far more destructive. Entire convoys could disappear within hours. Britain's food reserves were beginning to fall to dangerous levels. The situation had the potential to change the outcome of the entire war. The team at Bletchley Park was no longer merely breaking codes, they were racing against time. And in that race, even the smallest mistake could mean disaster. Turing's team operated in a special section known as Hut 8. There, they focused specifically on analyzing Enigma messages from the German Navy. These messages were far more difficult than the others because submarine operations were incredibly sensitive. One wrong interpretation could lead to hundreds of ships being destroyed. Turing managed Hut 8 almost like a laboratory. Every idea was tested, every assumption analyzed, and no concept was dismissed as impossible. To him, impossible simply meant something not yet understood. That philosophy completely transformed the way the team thought. People were no longer just searching for solutions, they were searching for weaknesses within the system itself. Then one day, a crucial discovery was made. German weather reports almost always began in the same format. That small detail strengthened the Banborismus method significantly, because repeating patterns acted like hidden keys that made decryption easier. As a result, the Bomba machines became more efficient. Instead of testing every possibility one by one, the system could now prioritize the most likely scenarios first. It was a major breakthrough, but it still was not enough, because the Germans continued improving the system. By mid-1942, Enigma had been strengthened even further. New security protocols were introduced, and additional layers of encryption were added for certain operations. The result was another crisis at Bletchley Park. For a period of time, most submarine messages became unreadable again. Losses in the Atlantic rose rapidly. The British Navy felt blind once more. It was one of the most critical moments of the war. If Enigma was completely lost again, Britain's survival itself could be threatened. During this period, Turing began developing an even more radical idea. If the existing machines were no longer enough, then a new kind of machine had to be built. Not a machine that merely tested possibilities, but one that could think faster. The concept was still in its earliest stages, but the foundations had already been laid. And at the same time, in another section of Bletchley Park, an even more secret project had begun.
This project would change not only Turing's future, but the course of the entire war. A new form of electronic calculating machine was being developed. It did not yet have a famous name, but this technology marked the birth of the first true computers that would eventually transform humanity forever. And in Turing's mind, one question had now become more important than any other. Can a machine do more than calculate? Can it think? It was a question that reached far beyond the war itself, and the answer would change not only Enigma, but the entire world.
By 1943, the war was no longer progressing through the dominance of one side alone. The balance in Europe was slowly beginning to shift. German advances in North Africa had been halted. Fighting on the Soviet front had intensified, and for the first time, the Allies were beginning to discuss the possibility of a true counteroffensive. But behind all of these developments stood an invisible force, the messages being decrypted at Bletchley Park. Ultra-intelligence had become the silent engine of the war. Yet even this engine still had missing parts. Enigma had been broken in many areas, but the far more complex encryption systems used by the German High Command remained a serious problem. Alongside Enigma, the Germans used another system known as the Lorenz SC40/42. This device was even more difficult to crack because it operated on an entirely different principle. The challenge was no longer simply about rotors, it was about streams of information flowing electronically. The teams at Bletchley Park struggled against this new system. The bomb machines had been designed specifically for Enigma, and they were ineffective against Lorenz. At that moment, one of the greatest technological leaps in history began. Max Newman and his team started designing a completely new machine. This machine would not rely only on mechanical calculation. It would possess electronic computing power. Its name was Colossus. Colossus is considered one of the first programmable electronic computers in human history. Inside it were thousands of vacuum tubes. For the time, the technology seemed unbelievable. Vacuum tubes generated enormous heat and failed frequently. Yet, despite all the risks, Colossus worked. When the machine powered on, a low hum filled the room. Lights flickered, circuits flashed, and streams of data tape moved rapidly through the system. Information was no longer merely being analyzed, information was being processed. Although Alan Turing was not directly responsible for the design of Colossus, his ideas formed the intellectual foundation behind it. The machine logic he had developed years earlier was now becoming a real physical system. Something had changed inside Bletchley Park. Humans were no longer simply asking machines for assistance. The machines themselves were beginning to think. Thanks to Colossus, Lorenz encrypted messages started being decrypted. This meant the strategic plans of the German High Command could finally be read. It was no longer only submarines that could be tracked. Entire military strategies were becoming visible. This advantage in information determined the invisible winner of the war. But behind these successes existed a massive paradox. The Germans never realized Enigma had been broken, nor did they understand they were being watched constantly. Bletchley Park's greatest weapon was its silence. For Alan Turing, this period represented both his greatest triumph and one of his heaviest burdens, because every success also meant altering the fate of thousands of lives. One decrypted message could save an entire city, while another message left unsolved could allow an attack to happen. This ethical conflict became a permanent shadow inside Turing's mind. Yet he continued working. By 1944, the Allies were finally ready to go on the offensive. The U-boat threat in the Atlantic had been brought largely under control. German submarine positions could now be predicted. The enemy that had once been invisible was now visible. This development saved the most critical logistical route of the war. Britain was no longer facing the threat of starvation, and the path toward the great invasion of Europe had been opened. June 6, 1944, the Normandy landings, one of the largest military operations in world history.
The success of the invasion depended heavily on intelligence. The Germans tried to predict where the attack would come, but they had been deliberately misled. Through fake information, false codes, and carefully managed deception, German defenses were divided and confused. And behind that strategy stood the invisible intelligence of Bletchley Park. Alan Turing's contributions were not visible on the battlefield itself, but the course of the war was flowing through his ideas. After Normandy, the war entered a path from which there was no return. Germany slowly began retreating. Allied forces were reclaiming Europe step by step. By 1945, the war was over. Europe lay in ruins. Millions were dead. But at the same time, humanity had experienced one of the greatest technological and scientific transformations in history. After the war, the existence of Bletchley Park remained secret for many years. People did not know how Enigma had been broken. The work carried out by Alan Turing and his team was hidden from the public. That silence became one of their greatest sacrifices. As for Alan Turing, the post-war years would lead him down an entirely different path. The war was over, but another question had now taken hold of his mind. If machines can break codes, can they also learn to think? That question would lead him into the deepest foundations of modern computer science. But the man who had helped save his country during the war was about to face an unexpected fate within that very same country. And the most tragic part of the story had not even begun yet.
When the war ended, the world felt as if it could finally breathe again. European cities were in ruins, but the war was over. Humanity had left behind one of the most devastating periods in its history. Yet, what had taken place inside Bletchley Park would remain completely hidden from the outside world for many years. For Alan Turing, the war had ended in victory, but this victory was never spoken aloud. It appeared neither in newspapers nor in official statements. He and his team had achieved an invisible success, and the fate of invisible successes is often silence. Post-war Britain had now entered a period of reconstruction. Factories, universities, and scientific research centers were being rebuilt. Turing returned to academic life in this new era. He began working at the University of Manchester, but his mind was no longer the same as it had been before the war. The Bletchley Park experience had fundamentally changed the way he thought. He was no longer concerned only with mathematical problems, but with a much larger question. Could a machine actually think? At the time, this question was almost a philosophical debate, because thinking was not merely about calculation, it was about producing meaning. Turing began to push this boundary. In 1950, Turing published a highly important paper in the scientific world, Computing Machinery and Intelligence. In this paper, he asked a simple yet striking question: can machines think? And then he proposed an even radical idea. He suggested that the intelligence of a machine could be evaluated through a written conversation with it. If a human being could not distinguish whether the entity on the other side was a machine, then that machine could be said to exhibit a form of intelligence. This idea would later become known as the Turing test. Today, it remains at the core of artificial intelligence discussions. However, while Turing's scientific rise continued, another aspect of his life was becoming an increasingly serious threat. In 1950s Britain, social laws were extremely strict. Turing's private life was considered a crime under the legal system of the time. This marked a dark period that overshadowed his scientific work. In 1952, Turing was arrested by the police. This event became a turning point in his life. A man who contributed greatly to humanity was now defenseless against the state's legal system. At the end of the trial, Turing was given two options: prison or hormone treatment. He chose the second option in order to continue his scientific work. This process deeply affected both his physical and psychological health. The mind that once changed the course of a war was now fighting a silent battle within itself. But even so, he did not stop working. In his laboratory in Manchester, he continued his research on the fundamental theories of computer science. He was thinking about artificial intelligence, biological systems, and mathematical modeling. He was still trying to build the future. But the world had not yet fully understood his value. In 1954, Alan Turing was found dead in his home. The official statement described his death as a tragedy, but the details never overshadowed his scientific legacy. Because what Turing left behind was far greater than a single life story. He had laid the foundations of modern computer science. The concept of the Turing machine is the theoretical basis of all digital systems we use today. Mobile phones, computers, the internet, all are extensions of his ideas. Breaking Enigma was not just a military achievement, it was a turning point that permanently changed humanity's relationship with information. Alan Turing's story is not only the story of a mathematician, it is the story of a mind that in the midst of an unseen war pushed the limits of human intelligence. And perhaps the most important question is this: if Turing had not existed, what would our world look like today? That question still has no answer. But one thing is certain: he did not just break codes, he rewrote the future. And his story did not end here, because his ideas are still alive today.
If you found this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe for more similar documentary content. You can also support the video by liking it, and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think technology today would have reached the same level if Alan Turing had never existed? I'm looking forward to your opinions in the comments.